This is SBS News in Easy English. I'm Claire Slattery. Australia will join other Western nations and impose sanctions on Russia as punishment for its actions in Ukraine. Prime Minister Scott Morrison says targeted travel bans and financial sanctions will be imposed on individuals in Russia's National Security Council. Broader sanctions will be extended to the separatist Ukrainian regions of Donetsk and Luhansk. The PM says these restrictions will bring Australia into line with the United States and the United Kingdom, who also announced sanctions overnight.
This invasion is unjustified, it's unwarranted, it's unprovoked, and it's unacceptable. Australians always stand up to bullies, and we will be standing up to Russia, along with all of our partners, like-mindeds, and all of those who believe that it is absolutely unacceptable that Russia could invade its neighbour.
Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine will be available for children aged 6 to 11 years old from tomorrow. The rollout of Moderna for kids can start after the Australian Technical Advisory Group on Immunisation gave its final approval for the use of the vaccine in this group. Federal Health Minister Greg Hunt says it's an important step forward.
It's the same formula. It's half of the adult primary dose, but it's the same as the adult booster dose. So we have Moderna in over 4,000 points of presence around the country.
A 60-year-old woman has been found dead in a submerged vehicle on the Sunshine Coast as flash flooding in the region continues. An emergency warning is being issued, with Queensland Police asking people not to drive through floodwaters. It comes as parts of New South Wales have also experienced flash flooding, with more than 1 month's worth of rain falling in Sydney in 24 hours. The State Emergency Service responded to over 200 requests for help overnight. New South Wales Police has announced a $500,000 reward for information over the disappearance of Belgian backpacker Theo Ayez. The 18-year-old vanished on a night out in the northern New South Wales beach town of Byron Bay nearly 3 years ago. State authorities hope the reward will lead to the discovery of Mr. Ayez's whereabouts or information about the circumstances of his disappearance. Tonga's main internet connection to the rest of the world has finally been restored, more than 5 weeks after a huge volcanic eruption and tsunami severed a crucial undersea cable. 3 people in Tonga died and dozens of homes were destroyed in the January 15th disaster. Tonga Cable, the state-run company that owns the power line, says it was reconnected on Tuesday and is now working again. Tonga Cable will now repair a second severed cable that connects some outer islands to the main island and runs close to the undersea volcano. In sport, the United States women's national soccer team has won a landmark equal pay settlement with the sport's governing body. The settlement comes after a 6-year legal battle and will see US soccer pay men and women equally for all future games. The deal, worth $24 million, is one of the largest in US soccer history and will see a large amount of back pay to current and former players. It's an unexpected win for the playing group, whose equal pay claim was dismissed by a judge in 2020. I'm Claire Slattery. This is SBS News in Easy English. This is SBS News in Easy English. I'm Claire Slattery. The United States says it expects Russia to invade Ukraine as early as tonight. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has told NBC News Russian troops are in a final point of readiness at Ukraine's borders. The United Nations Security Council has held an emergency meeting at the request of Ukraine, calling again for a diplomatic solution. Mr. Blinken says there is still a chance to avert a major aggression through diplomacy.
Everything seems to be in place for Russia to engage in a major aggression against Ukraine.
To be clear, you think tonight that could happen or will happen?
Look, I can't put a date or an exact time on it, but everything is in place for Russia to move forward.
The Australian government has formally signed off on sanctions announced against Russia over its aggression towards Ukraine. Prime Minister Scott Morrison met with Governor-General David Hurley this morning to sign off on the sanctions. Mr. Morrison says the sanctions will become law from Friday, but are not due to take effect until the end of March. But Mr. Morrison has conceded he doesn't expect the sanctions to lead to Russia pulling back.
The reason we're doing this is there must be a price for the unprovoked, unlawful, unwarranted, unjustified attacks and threats and intimidation that is being imposed by Russia on Ukraine.
Hundreds of Australian jobs could be at risk after one of the country's biggest construction companies, ProBuild, was placed into administration. Deloitte has been appointed as administrator after ProBuild's South African parent company, Wilson Bailey Homes Ofcon, withdrew its financial support. WBHO is blaming the Australian government's management of the COVID-19 pandemic and the damage it's done to the Australian construction market. ProBuild employs more than 1,000 people as well as contract trade workers and holds a $5 billion portfolio. The company is currently managing at least a dozen major projects across Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland and Western Australia. The union representing construction workers, the CFMEU, says it's trying to establish the company's situation and the likely impact on workers. The search is continuing for a 54-year-old man missing in floodwaters on Queensland's Sunshine Coast. There are fears the man was swept away after his motorcycle, helmet and bag were found abandoned near Gympie on Wednesday morning. A 63-year-old woman was killed yesterday in the floods affecting the state's southeast. More heavy rainfall and damaging winds are expected in the coming days. In sport, and athletes participating at this year's Commonwealth Games in Birmingham will be allowed to protest at the podium. Event organisers have released a set of guiding principles for athlete advocacy. The new guidelines allow competitors to carry an Indigenous or Pride flag during a victory lap, take a knee or raise a fist on the podium, and speak out in favour of other social justice causes. Hate messages and protests aimed at a specific organisation, person or country will not be allowed. You've been listening to SBS News in Easy English. I'm Claire Slattery. This is SBS News in Easy English. I'm Claire Slattery. Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison has criticised China for failing to condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Mr. Morrison has announced Australia will join other Western nations in increasing sanctions against Russia and its allies. New measures will include the targeting of Russian leaders and media channels, as well as officials from neighbouring Belarus, while Australia will also send non-lethal military equipment to Ukraine. Mr. Morrison says he's concerned over reports that China has eased its trade restrictions on Russian wheat.
So at a time when Australia, together with the United Kingdom, together with the United States and Europe and Japan, are acting to cut off Russia, the Chinese government is following through on easing trade restrictions with Russia. And that is simply unacceptable.
The White House says there are credible reports that Russian soldiers are holding staff hostage at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine. Russian forces seized the plant in the first hours of their invasion of the country. Located 130 kilometres north of the capital, Kyiv, Chernobyl was the site of the world's worst nuclear disaster when a reactor exploded in 1986, spreading radioactive waste across Europe. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki says the hostages should be released.
This unlawful and dangerous hostage-taking, which could upend the routine civil service efforts required to maintain and protect the nuclear waste facilities, is obviously incredibly alarming and greatly concerning.
At least 137 people are reported to have died in the first hours of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. An estimated 100,000 Ukrainians have fled their homes, with several thousand now crossing into neighbouring countries, including Moldova, Romania, Poland and Hungary. Residents in the capital, Kyiv, say international organisations must help to prevent a humanitarian crisis. Diana Iskander, a Kyiv resident, has told SBS many are in panic, with essential food no longer available in supermarkets.
From what I have seen on the streets, from what I have seen in the market, no bread, no canned food. People are panicking. People are just gathering their stuff and trying to leave. Some other are just hiding in shelters.
To other news briefly, and a third person has died in floodwaters caused by torrential rain lashing Australia's eastern seaboard this week. Emergency services found the body of a 54-year-old man in a Land Cruiser near Maddens Creek at Matcham, east of Gosford on the New South Wales Central Coast overnight. Several areas of the New South Wales, mid-north and central coasts were hit with more than 100 millimetres of rain in 24 hours. Torrential rain is expected to continue in the area today as Sydney rounds out what could be its wettest summer in 3 decades. You've been listening to SBS News in Easy English. I'm Claire Slattery.